And I went to the altar. I did the ugly cry. The guest speaker couldn't understand anything I was saying and went and got my dad. And my dad comes over and I look up at him through all the tears and I say, I have to be a pastor.
Welcome to Voices of Deconversion. We share the inspirational stories of deconversion told by former Christians who are now atheist or agnostic. Our stories remind us we're in it together. They encourage us as we discover who we are and help us to embrace who we become. Now here's Steve with today's guest.
Welcome back for episode 42. Today's guest has a remarkable story. For starters, he's only been out from behind the pulpit for 6 months, and this is after 26 years in ministry. He's joined today by his wife for the interview, and they both decided to use their nicknames, LA and T. There are so many fascinating twists and turns in their story, I can't even begin to mention them all in the intro. I want to keep it as short as possible so that we can get right to the interview, but I'll just mention a few things about his story, some highlights. He was raised as a pastor's kid in the Midwest. His parents were farmers. They were thoroughly fundamentalist, and there were a lot of expectations and ever-changing standards when he was growing up. A big moment in his life is when he is offered a national recording contract as a musician and told he would get played on 500 radio stations nationally. This was such an amazing opportunity for him as he was still in high school. However, his Southern Baptist parents had a different take. Shortly thereafter, he feels called to be a pastor. He meets his wife in college, and later in their marriage, they experience a tragic loss. His career as a pastor is marked by some significant and interesting moments, one of them being he was named one of the top 300 influential evangelical ministers in the country. He was also friends with Ted Haggard. If you've seen Jesus Camp, you'll know Ted Haggard's story a little bit. He was like a spiritual consultant to President George W. Bush, and he was also caught later on in a scandal that involved sex and drugs. And this wasn't the only fraudulent leader in the Christian evangelical world that he had experiences with. LA's story is interesting because there's a lot of things that could have shook his faith, but didn't. Some really difficult things that he went through, and it wasn't until his trip to India that things began to change. One of the most intriguing elements to this story is that as he begins to deconvert, much of his leadership team at his church goes along for the ride. The way this happens and how they all transition out of Christianity is fascinating. I had such a wonderful time meeting LA and his wife T, and I know you're going to really enjoy this interview. It goes a little bit longer than normal, but much like our conversation went, I think it's going to go really fast when you're listening to it because there's so many fascinating details and twists and turns, and they have some really great insights. So without further ado, here is my interview with LA and T. All right, well, I am joined today by LA and his wife T. Thanks for joining me on the Voices of Deconversion podcast.
Awesome to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so I start out the podcast by asking kind of how you identify as a non-believer. So do you guys go by the term atheist or agnostic, or is there another term that you prefer?
That's a great question. I've thought a lot about it because I knew you were going to ask this. I've listened to your podcast.
Yeah.
And, oh, my goodness. I think at this point, because we're so new in our journey at this point.
Well, you answer for yourself. You probably have a different answer than me.
I would probably say I really don't want to claim a label at this point.
Cool.
I came out of so many labels. And usually, once I'm labeled something, I usually rebel against it pretty quickly. So,
True.
So for me, I don't know what to call myself.
Yeah.
That's
How
cool.
about you?
That's a good answer for you. I like that.
I had another guest say that she didn't like labels, and I think that's actually important. If you don't want to name it, don't name it. You know? Yeah.
I have a good friend who tells me that I am through and through a humanist. He's like, you are a natural humanist. And so he's trying to convince me that I should take that label.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that label, humanist.
Yeah,
it's
I'm not against it at all.
It's not threatening.
No.
It's just no one knows what it means in the Christian world, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's true.
Well, and how about for you, T? What do you use a label to identify your beliefs, or?
I do not at this point. I came out like to Luke. I told him like a while ago, I was like, I don't identify as a Christian anymore. So I'm not a Christian. But yeah, I've, like Luke, have looked at a lot of the labels out there, and I'm not terribly excited about any of them either. I definitely am very spiritual. So I don't know what that makes me. Okay. Spiritual humanist?
Well, take me into your story a little bit. Tell me about, how Christianity influenced you as you were growing up. We'll start with kind of the early years.
Okay. I grew up in the Midwest. Both of us did. Mm-hmm. We met in college, so it was years later. We didn't know one another growing up. But for me, I grew up in a minister's home. I can't say that I really understood. I was a minister's child at first because we were farmers. We had a huge, huge farm, longtime family, many generations farming. And so that was our main identity. And my dad preached on the weekends. And through grade school, he was a Southern Baptist evangelist and traveled all over, about 7 different states, traveled everywhere. And we'd sometimes go with him and sometimes not. And then later in middle school and high school, he took a pastorate. And we kind of settled down. And then that's when I started really, really realizing that I was a PK.
Yeah, that unique experience that pastors kids have.
Yeah. And it was, my parents were Southern Baptist, but pastored a non-denominational church. And it was still very, very fundamentalistic. Looking back on it now after all these years, yes, it was thoroughly fundamentalist. And, all the different types of things as far as, did you do your homework? Have you spent an hour memorizing your Bible verses for today? Breakfast before school was always the daily bread, which always struck me odd because I felt like, as a kid, it was the Christian horoscope. If it was a positive Bible verse that day in the devotional, then I knew I was going to have a positive day. And if it was not a positive verse, then I was worried all day, what's going to go wrong and God's going to have to save me from.
That's really interesting. I've never heard someone describe the scriptures like that, but that's totally true.
Very much.
I totally did the thing where you flip the Bible pages. You have a problem, you're trying to hear God, and you just open to a page and hope that the answer's in there somewhere. And it's kind of like if it's good or if it's bad, that kind of dictates how you feel. Yeah, that's funny.
So we had those superstitions, of course. And so our home was very strict. There was a lot of expectation put on us. My sister and I have a sister that's a year and a half younger than me. A lot of expectations put on us to not bring shame or disrespect to the ministry, So,
and some ever-changing standards.
Oh, ever-changing standards. I remember in high school, up to high school, my sister was not allowed to wear pants at all. It was always dresses and skirts. And culottes. Do you remember those culottes?
I've heard of them. I don't know if I saw them, if I could recognize them, but I hear they're pretty horrible.
Yeah. Well, no one sells them. So my mom made them, of course, But my sister would have to wear those if she didn't want to wear a skirt. But by the time we got to high school, evidently there had been a new decree from God that allowed my sister to wear pants twice a week, but they couldn't be denim. They couldn't be jeans.
Okay.
And I remember just, really being conflicted by that. Like, when did this change?
When did God change his mind?
when did God change his mind about our dress code, And then it became 3 days a week, and they could be denim material, but they had to be print on them, like flower jeans and that sort of thing. Huh. And then eventually it was jeans and so on. But it was always these types of things evolving like this. And I wouldn't say I was a rebellious kid by any means.
No, he actually tried to live up to all those ever-changing expectations. Because he was in college when we first met, so that was the agony of conversation that we would have back in the early days. You trying to work through what it meant to live life now that you were not going to be part of your family as just to sound like you were going to move out in the world and have your own identity. And what did that look like? Because you had all these expectations on you.
Yeah. And I wanted to be involved in sports and all that type of stuff, but it wasn't really allowed because there were so many conflicts. If there's special practices or tournament games on Sundays or Wednesday nights, that's out. Got to be in church, So I turned to music. No one in my family was musical. I picked up a guitar, got a book, and taught myself. And before I knew it, I was in high school traveling with a music group, 34 weekends out of the year. We were touring.
Southern Gospel.
Yeah, Southern Gospel. 5, 6, 7 states. We were the potluck entertainers, and it was never really famous by any means, but we were like the B band to the Kingsmen and the Statesmen and all those types of groups. Definitely was on a lot of stages with a lot of interesting people.
I have some old videos. He was really crazy good, like really good. Yeah, he's really good.
Cool.
I had hair then too.
You did. And you had a Superman curl back then too.
Well, how often did you say you guys traveled to tour?
Oh, I was on the road 34 out of 52 weekends.
That's crazy. So every weekend you were going somewhere essentially. And that was the majority of your high school experience?
It was. Friday, get home from school and be loading everything up and hitting the road with the quartet. And my parents were okay with that because it was kind of like, adult chaperones were with me at all times. And
it was a married couple that was part of the quartet.
Yeah, my sister was part of it too. So we both were able to escape and get a little freedom and start meeting lots of different people. I remember a lot of the entertainers, the big names. It was always interesting after the shows out by the buses. I remember the first time I saw some of my heroes standing out there sucking down cigarettes and cussing and telling off-color jokes after just giving an altar call, on the stage. And I was just shocked. I was like, this isn't supposed to be,
Yeah.
And so that really caused me to, again, to evaluate things. And also, it was King James only, and I was exposed to the NIV, the nearly inspired version of the Bible.
Oh my God, that's so funny. That's all we used in my churches growing up was the NIV.
Yeah.
That's what I grew up on too, and that's probably why your parents didn't like me at first, huh?
Yeah, I think so. There was a lot of reasons they did not like you.
Oh no.
So I, by the time I was 17 years old, I had written some original music and got recognized and was offered a national recording contract with a small label. And it was like they were promised 500 radio stations and full page ads in all the big print magazines at that time. And
back when people bought that stuff.
Yeah, back when we looked at magazines.
And was it just you, or was it like the group?
It was just me.
Wow,
the
cool.
group didn't like to sing my songs too much because my songs were contemporary. They weren't Southern
they were more
gospel.
Formal, right? You said Southern Gospel. Okay. Yeah.
So they would always give me 10 minutes during the show to play a little bit of my music. And from doing that, I got recognized and eventually did some recording and so on. But with that contract, I came home with it, ready to sign it, so excited, 17 years old. This is crazy. And my parents set me down and they say, this is really, really amazing, but this may be a test from God. And they explained to me that there's levels of calling and that there's a higher calling, and the higher calling cannot be compromised with entertainment or music and so on, but it's to preach the word of God in season and out of season.
Wow.
And so I was just torn, like you were saying earlier, T, that I really tried to live up to it. I really tried my best. And so eventually within a week, I just broke. And it was at a special service at church. And I went to the altar. I did the ugly cry, right? The guest speaker couldn't understand anything I was saying and went and got my dad. And my dad comes over and I look up at him through all the tears and I say, I have to be a pastor. And then it was just pure celebration. Everyone was so excited.
Wow, that is so conflicting and confusing. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm assuming, was that, you said you were torn, so like you really wanted, obviously, to do this music thing.
Oh yeah.
And
His heart.
it kills me that, like, because this happens to so many Christians, evangelical Christians, it's like you have to find God's specific plan for you, which is totally obscure and like no one's ever going to be sure.
Yeah.
And so this great opportunity comes along, but for some reason your parents felt like that's not what you should be doing with your life and interpreted that as God's, voice to them. And then you're a kid, so you're going to be very influenced by your parents and what they want for your life. Oh, that's tough. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though, like, they would say, we don't want you to be called by mom and dad, we want you to be called by God. But here he is within that system, within that culture, within that structure. And he wants to live up to the highest. Like, you don't want to let anybody down. You don't want to settle for something that's less than the greatest. So you showed the willingness to sacrifice and, like, okay, I'll step up to the plate and I'll do something that maybe I don't want to do right now, but this is the right decision.
Yeah.
And that's so indicative of that world, is there's an absolute right. And then there's maybe other stuff that you can get away with, but it's not really right.
I wanted to respect my parents, but I was terrified. I was freaking terrified of God. Like the story of Jonah. That's the story we tell all the kids. If you don't get in the perfect will of God, it has to be the perfect, not just the will of God, but the perfect will of God, then what's going to happen to you? You're going to get swallowed by a big fish and and God will still have his way, but you'll be miserable the whole time.
Yeah.
So I was terrified, and I just felt like I had to do it. I remember they had a big service afterwards and presented me before the congregation, and I stood up there and I said, I have to be a pastor. And looking back on it, no one questioned the compulsory, it's like the value of that statement at all. They just broke out in hallelujahs and amens.
That's really interesting too, because like there was no sign maybe up to that point that you were going to go into the ministry, right?
Oh, they would have me speak from time to time, but as youth things and so on. And because I was touring and being the front man in these groups, I was good on stage. I knew how to handle crowds.
You'd
grown
been
in my
speaking
entertainment
in front
skills.
of crowds since he was 9. He'd been kind of groomed for that his whole life. But I think music was his outlet that was outside of the very strict structure, even though it was in itself kind of a strict structure. But it was a little less than the strict structure that he had grown up with the Southern Baptist and the ministry call. So I think it was like his first taste of freedom, would you say?
Oh, yeah, big time.
Yeah.
Wow.
Big time.
And so then that was just taken away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is,
Completely.
that's hard to process, especially in high school.
The contract was tore up, and as soon as I graduated, I was sent off to college to be a preacher boy.
So how long into high school did you go, touring? And then I guess, how old were you when you got this contract offer?
I was 17. Okay. Was I going on 18 or 17?
I didn't know you then.
Yeah, it was around 17. So by my senior year, I was graduating and tearing up that contract, and now being sent off to be a preacher boy, which was very conflicting for me at that time.
Wow.
I took music classes on the side secretly.
You did?
I did.
Didn't tell your parents?
No.
That's really funny. I mean, that's cool though, because you're like exploring that part of your life, the only way you could.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so crazy that like Christian contemporary music was the bad thing. That was the bad option.
Yeah.
Oh
my goodness, yeah.
And that's all I listened to growing up.
Yeah.
That's what I listened to,
me
Amy
too.
Grant and Sandy Patty back in the day.
Yeah.
So that's another reason I think his parents didn't like me, because I listened to contemporary Christian music.
Yeah, the big reason my parents didn't like T is that I met her while I was in college, and there was a rule in our family that my sister and I could not date anyone that mom and dad did not know.
Wow.
So they had to know them. And of course, that really limited the field.
Right.
And I go up to college, and I only live at home during the summer, and I'm working all the time. So most of the year I'm gone. I meet T, and she's awesome. And she's into music and everything too. And at that time, I was secretly, my music fetish, I was playing Christian punk and thrash. And T was doing
Sandy Patty.
Yeah, and opera. So
Great.
I would drag her into some of the shows, and she'd do backup vocals for us and so on, because she's
Crazy.
the only one who could sing harmony.
Oh, that's cool.
You know?
Yeah, that is so crazy. So tell me about those college days then. So, you went basically to like a 4-year get your bachelor's degree.
Yes, this is a crazy part too. My mom and dad were so, we want to send you to the greatest minister school on the planet. And they had talked to some friends, and those friends told them the greatest school for preachers is Bob Jones University.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Cue the eerie music now. The Boris Karloff.
Yeah, that's as conservative as it gets.
Oh my goodness. And I had no clue. I got there and oh my goodness. Wow. I immediately started getting on the payphone begging my parents, please get me out of here. Please.
Really?
My hero at the time was Billy Graham. And the first 2 weeks in the preacher boy class, Bob Jones Jr. came to the class and for 2 solid weeks lectured on the evils of Billy Graham.
Oh, wow. It's insane. It's a whole nother level of conservative.
Yeah.
Christian.
Totally.
Yeah,
it's just
crazy.
mind-blowing, The Pope is the Antichrist and on and all this stuff you learn. In the middle of the campus, you have to cross a bridge that goes to all the classes, and there in the water fountain is buried Bob Jones Sr., and you have to be complete silence as you walk across the bridge to your classes, or you get demerits, and so many demerits you get kicked out.
Wow. Like
girls on certain sidewalks, guys on certain sidewalks. I mean, it was just bells and whistles. It was like being in prison. And the whole campus is surrounded by a 10 or 12 foot chain link fence with ivy and then concertina barbed wire across the top.
That is so crazy.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I mean, I knew Bob Jones was conservative, but essentially like a prison compound.
Oh, huge. Yeah, it was terrifying.
And was that where you two met?
No.
Oh, okay.
My parents were not.
I wasn't that conservative.
No. My parents were not going to let me out of Bob Jones, but they came to visit. They made the long drive from Illinois down there to see me, and we're not allowed on campus because the campus was on lockdown because we were all in special Vespers service.
What's special Vespers?
It's some kind of service where they have old spiritual songs and then like old Southern preaching.
Oh, okay.
That goes on. Yeah.
Interesting.
And so we were all required, locked out of our dorm rooms, herded into, the service, and parents were locked out of the campus and not allowed in.
Whoa.
So when that was all done, they were able to get in to see me. And then that's when they were like, okay, yeah, this is crazy. We'll get you out of here.
Oh
so
gosh.
They talked to another minister friend, and I ended up at Taylor University in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
That's where we met.
Okay. Because I was going to say, because you grew up kind of more like I did in a less conservative but still evangelical home. I mean,
correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I was thinking like, wow, like if you'd gone to Bob Jones, that would have been really interesting. Yeah.
No, it'd been terrible.
Now that was in South. Yeah, and that's in South Carolina, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Greenville.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So you're off to Taylor University in Indiana.
In Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I remember the first chapel service I was sitting in. There was this person sitting in front of me, beautiful long hair. It smelled so good. And the whole chapel service, I'm thinking, I can't wait. I'm going to ask someone out here, I didn't want to date anybody at Bob Jones University. And as soon as service is over, everyone stands up, turns around, and it's a guy. Oh. And I'm like, oh, this isn't Bob Jones. We can grow our hair long.
That is so funny.
I ended up playing punk rock with them.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
That's hilarious. When did you guys eventually meet?
She lived in Indiana, and we met at the church that we attended on the weekends.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
That's how we met. And my time at Taylor was great. I was doing a double major in elementary education and pastoral ministry, I wasn't convinced that I could actually make a living. I knew too many pastors who were struggling, so I had a double major. And so played a lot of music and all that sort of thing. I met T, fell in love, and it was my junior year that my parents were having a farming crisis, huge drought, and just took its toll. And I took that semester off to help with everything, and in the meantime got a really good job, and then fell into pastoring and got married, and I just never did go back and finish my degree.
So that you just, because of the family circumstances, had to help out. And
it wasn't intentional, but it was what it was, and saved most of the farm, not all of it, and the rest is history, as I said. Married 26 years now and 4 kids.
Oh, that's so cool. It's cool that you guys were able to stay together through all of this, because this is such a tumultuous thing to have to go through, and there's no telling. I mean, there's a lot of spouses that can't, it doesn't work anymore. So
well, I'm sure we'll get into that, but we had our moments.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, my wife and I did as well. We are still together, but when I was first deconverting, I mean, she was having all those thoughts, like you said, we'll get into it, but maybe I'm jumping ahead too soon. But
No.
Well, tell me a little bit, like up to this point in your life, your personal relationship with God, how would you have described that?
I studied Greek and Hebrew. Definitely not a scholar by any means, but when it came to Greek, I was able to translate scripture and everything. That, for me, translating Greek, I realized at that point that all this talk about the King James Bible and the word for word translation, it's just bogus. It's just BS. And
no such thing if you know another language.
Yeah. T speaks French. And so when she translates from French into English, you paraphrase. And you do that. I have spoken...
Because a word for word doesn't always make sense.
No, I've spoken with through interpreters all around the world. And they paraphrase what you say. When I'd have meetings where I was supposed to be the speaker, I'd meet with the interpreters and talk to them what I was going to preach that night. And
so that they would have context.
They would have context, and then they could paraphrase the whole thing. And I could get up there and recite the ABCs, but they'd go ahead and preach a sermon.
That always baffled me. Well, it baffled me from the time I started to learn about Bible translation in college. It really baffled me because, like the Greek, like you realize a certain phrase or a certain Bible verse, if it's in, it could be interpreted multiple ways. And of course, the NIV folks, they'll interpret it in a very conservative way, and like the RSV, it'll be more liberal, and both could be considered legitimate,
sure,
depending on the verse or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's what's funny is I'm actually surprised. So I'm surprised that you studied the Greek and the Hebrew, because really conservative churches that I've run into, a lot of times they like, that's like, oh, don't do that. Like that's not, like, I don't know if they would say it's bad, but
It must have been a mistake along with the music, the stuff on the side. It was my sophomore year that I started doing that.
Of college.
And
Okay.
And I remember my Greek class. Oh, I fall asleep. It was so terrible. It was so boring. I fall asleep every class, 8 o'clock in the morning. And my professor in the second week, he calls me to the front of the class. And he says, here's your seat in front of the class, and here's your coffee. How do you take it? I said, I don't know. I've never drank coffee. And he said, well, you're drinking it black. And so every single morning for that class, I'd sit in the front and he'd have a hot cup of coffee for me. I ended up doing great in the class then.
That's hilarious. That's kind of cool though, in a way.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of neat.
Well, I realized in translating that, Greek's backwards, and then you got to locate and put the words together, noun, verb, adjectives, and all that stuff. And that's where one translation varies from another. But really where the big variance is who's interpreting it, what their doctrinal stance is. Mm-hmm. And that's how they choose which noun goes with which verb, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And that's why we have so many translations and so many study Bibles. And so I saw those contradictions, and I saw how things could go different ways, as well as I saw a number of just out and out contradictions in Scripture. And I did not have an outlet to talk about that. I certainly could not go home and talk about that. I couldn't even take my NIV home you know.
Wow. I remember,
So,
yeah. Sorry, I
so
keep interjecting. I try not to do that.
No. Go ahead.
Thinking of things. I was in school and I was reading Bishop Spong. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Super liberal. Like, I mean, I would even question if he's even like a believer in the supernatural.
Yeah.
He's that.
Yeah.
But and sometimes I don't know if I always like feel like he's correct, but I was reading him and he's super liberal. And I was so afraid to like read that when I was hanging out at my parents' house, you know, because what if they see, you know, but I don't think they were that into like theology. So I don't think they even knew who he was, but I understand that fear, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I met T, and I mean,
I was your outlet, but it's not like I understood any of that because I hadn't been to.
No.
I did not go to Bible college at all, so I was not versed with any of those different arguments.
Yeah.
So I was just a sounding board.
She had been a cheerleader and wore shorts and mini skirts and was outgoing and just so much fun. Totally the opposite of anything my parents would want me
But
to
I
do.
also was a very devout Christian.
Yes, for sure.
Because that stuff was okay in the church I went to.
Yeah.
That wasn't taboo.
So she had to endure my quandaries, you know.
We would get home from a date and he'd be like, "I'm so sorry," because he had just like spewed all of the contradictions that he was struggling with the whole time, and he'd be like, "I'm so sorry, I just wasted your time."
That's
and I was
hilarious.
just elated to be with him, so I'm like, "That's okay, I don't care.
Yeah, preach me a sermon every time.
I love it."
Translate Greek anytime. Yeah.
That's pretty funny. So your dates involved theology and breaking down scriptures and stuff.
Yeah. Could not turn it off.
This is interesting because it's a while after that you end up deconverting, so to speak.
Oh, yeah.
Like 25 years.
Yeah, no clue we'd end up this point where
That's insane,
she's looking at me saying, I don't identify as a Christian anymore. And it took me a month after that. I was just kind of like,
that's a shocker.
Yeah, because his response to me was, "That makes me really sad." I'm like, "What?"
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know you still were.
And then like a month later, I was like, you know what? I remember the moment. She was in her ninja class. She takes.
I do type. Yeah.
What's it called? Ninjutsu.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm walking around with my coffee downtown Milwaukee, in Hipsterville, you know, and all of a sudden it hit me. I'm not a Christian.
Because you went through all the different, because you have to go through, you have to
the checklist.
The checklist. This is what a Christian is, and you're like, I'm not any of those.
What is it? The 5 or 6 or 10 points of what it means to be an evangelical, and I went through all the checklists. And it's like, shit, I'm not a Christian. So she's in class, so I can't preach her a sermon, right? You know?
Yay!
You spared her this once, but not by choice.
Yeah. But it was like a real spiritual experience, you know. It's
for
just
sure.
A shedding.
Just a shedding. So I grab my phone and I call the former administrator of our church that I pastored. And I'm like, Mary, you won't believe this. I'm not a Christian. She's like, oh, awesome. Yeah.
Because at that point she had kind of gone down. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, we'd already relinquished the church, the ministry that we had built.
We're getting ahead of ourselves, but that's...
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm doing it too. Yeah.
We had no idea it would lead to this point.
Oh,
you know,
it was
insane. But it's all those little steps along the way, right?
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I was thinking. Like, it's fascinating. You're deconstructing the Bible in a Christian way, an academic Christian way, with the different languages and learning about the translations, and it's starting to slowly chip away at this fantasy idea that the Bible's perfect. It's one way, one translation.
Yep.
You know, it starts to chip away, and you know, you're seeing these things, these contradictions through your life. It's very interesting to me.
And for us, again, you know, we had no idea we'd end up at this point. It's kind of like, so I used to sing Southern gospel. Now I do Christian thrash. You know, it's still Christian, but I'm doing thrash here, you know, instead of that style. And looking back on it, we've talked quite a bit about it here recently. It's like, I can see now that I wanted nothing to do with my mom and dad's faith. Yeah. I didn't know that. But, you know, if they liked Southern gospel, I liked Christian thrash. if they liked the King James, I liked the Living Translation. Yeah. And
Yeah.
Oh, that'll really get them going.
and not in a rebellious way or anything. It's just like I was more open to look at other things in the Christian world and consider them. Maybe they're okay. And I found out that you could play thrash and not be afraid of going to hell.
Yeah.
So that was awesome. And I had a lot of anger to let out through thrash. So.
Yeah, well, for sure, because your upbringing was quite strict. I mean, religiously strict for sure.
Very.
I think one of the things a theme that came up in our conversation, and I think this was one of the things that helped our journey, his journey and mine, to kind of unravel and move through and past Christianity, is seeking truth, if you will. So if you believe that there is, that 2 + 2 is 4, I don't care
even if
what language you speak or what religion you are. There are things that are true.
Yeah.
So I think that what your mom and dad gave you was a thirst and knowledge to know the truth.
Yeah.
And even though there were certain things that were off limits in their world that you were not allowed to consider, you went for them anyway because you were looking for what was true. So in looking for what was true, you're like, oh, this isn't true. This isn't true. And these were tenets of the Christian faith. You're like, oh, wait, that's not true. Yeah. The Bible isn't inerrant. It doesn't make sense. It does contradict itself. And so little by little, all these little pieces begin to unravel. And it's because they taught you to seek truth.
Exactly. I love that, actually. I think that's really cool because I see my mom being that way. She's still a very conservative Christian, but I remember her buying me books when I was like little, like 10 years old, and they were like the who, what, where, why, when books. And like each of them was just questions like what, like how hot is the sun, or when did dinosaurs become extinct, or whatever, right? They were for kids, but I always had this I always had questions, and I think my mom knew that, and she encouraged me to explore those questions. And I think it's kind of neat, even though they would not agree with where you are today. Your parents were like, T was just saying, they were kind of planting those seeds of like learning to seek out knowledge and learn and follow the truth wherever it leads.
They had really enjoyed me learning music. Again, no one in my family did any kind of music until my sister and I came along. We taught ourselves. And so they were excited about that. And of course, when we were in the Southern Gospel world, there was a lot of notoriety with that in the Southern Baptist realm and all that stuff. And so that was great for the family. And so they had seen me go off in that artistic direction. They didn't understand creative types or artistic, but they had some respect for me in that. Because I plowed through that and had done well. Because
you were leading souls to Jesus with the music.
Yeah, exactly. Set the chicken leg down and come forward and say the sinner's prayer.
Exactly. He was still doing the deal. It just happened to be with music.
Well, that's cool. I kind of like that angle.
Yeah.
So you're in college at this point. You guys are dating, and you are expressing doubts sometimes. Up to this point, is there anything else significant that we haven't touched on?
No, not really. From there, got my first pastorate. The church was 106 years old. Abraham Lincoln had actually attended it.
Wow.
It was a separate Baptist.
Separate Baptist, which I'd never heard of.
Which is different than Southern Baptist or regular Baptist.
Yeah, I'm still not Baptist. Quite for sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
What the separate Baptists were.
Wow. I've never heard that, yeah.
No. The founding families, their generations, they still were there. They were still on the elders board by de facto. They took turns taking possession of the sheepskin deed, the whole works and everything. Wow. That was an interesting time. There we were in our 20s, 2 babies, and our third child died of SIDS at 4 months old.
When we lived there.
And that was so, I can't even begin to express how traumatic that was.
I can't imagine.
Yeah.
70% of couples divorce after the loss of a child, and we definitely went through a dark time after that, because you just grieve in your own separate ways. And we were exposed to a couple different camps within Christianity at that time. There was a more spiritual, like the Pentecostal charismatic side.
They were Word of Faith type church.
So we had some friends in that camp, and they were. We had found some freedom in them from the strictness of the Southern Baptist world.
Well, we were both talented musicians.
Yeah, we did music.
And they
with them.
love music in the
they
charismatic
do, and
realm.
It's lively. I loved that they embraced the liveliness of music.
The separate Baptists don't like music, so we
well, as long as it's
with...
not too loud or just with an organ, they're okay with it.
So by day you were separate Baptists, but then when no one was looking, you'd sneak off and hang out with the Southern Baptists.
Go play some music.
And so during that time, we had these two different camps of friends. We had the very legalistic fundamentalists that we had come from, and our new camp of friends within the charismatic.
Who were Word of Faith.
Word of Faith, yeah, you bet. We had found some freedom in them and a bit of our own identity. But when our daughter died, it was so. Looking back, I think I was 21 years old, and you were 25 years old when we lost our child. Like we were just kids, and this was our third kid at that point.
I remember one of my friends came over, banged on the door, and opened the door, and he said, "Are you ready to confess?"
Confess.
This was the week our daughter died. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, "You're hiding some kind of sin. That's why your daughter died."
That is insane.
And I just...
And this was the charismatic Pentecostal crowd that we had found some freedom with.
Yeah, we're playing music with.
They were... They wanted to look. There had to be a reason, because God was good, and God would not let something bad happen to someone who truly believed in Him.
So, long story short, 1,000 people came to the funeral, and again, feeling compulsory, I had to say something. I got up and said a few words, and I honestly believe that'd be the last time I'd ever speak as a minister. I didn't stop believing. It's crazy. We didn't lose our faith.
We didn't lose our faith then.
But I just felt
we definitely saw the divide.
And we didn't feel like we had anything to offer anymore. It was just too much of a heartbreak.
Yeah.
And remember 2 weeks later, after that whole thing, neighbors called up. Their child had been stillborn. Oh, wow. And they wanted me to do the funeral because I would understand the pain. And again, feeling like I have to do this to honor God, Jonah and the whale, God isn't going to let me go. He'll let my daughter die, but he won't let me out of being a pastor, So I did the funeral and continued on. We went from our first church, we went to a community church where I was associate pastor for about 3 years, and then got into church planting and planted the church that I just resigned from here the end of this past year. I've been there almost 18 years. And
wow.
Yeah.
So
when you guys when you became pastor at the last church that you went to, about how old were you guys then? Like later 20s or 30s or?
In our 30s, right?
Late 20s.
Late 20s.
You were in your late 20s.
1999, so I was 29. Yeah.
Okay.
He was 29.
Cool.
And moved to Wisconsin. Prior to Wisconsin, I never, in our third grade geography test, I don't even remember Wisconsin being part of that test. You know what I mean? Wisconsin, how do you even spell that? It's just.
Sorry, my friends here from Wisconsin. It's just true. We do know.
Yeah. And it was definitely culture shock for us coming from the Midwest. The first 3 years, it was just strange acclimating to.
Yeah. Again, this is a very it's a very Catholic community up here, which is very different than the evangelical world that we came from.
Interesting.
And I think throughout the theme that we have seen, we have moved through a lot of different aspects of Christianity, a lot of different camps. We visited through them.
I just remembered this.
What?
Before moving here and starting this church, we had been invited to lead the music at a conference. And it was a charismatic Pentecostal woman who was leading the conference. What was her name? Ruth. Yeah. And I forget her full name, but she was doing the conference, and they invited us because they'd heard, we were great. And I remember taking the gig because it actually paid, and we needed the money, but I didn't know how I felt about a woman preacher. Where I came from, that was a huge no-no.
And I'm sorry, women, he doesn't feel that way anymore.
Oh, no,
no hate, no, please.
But that's the culture. Like, men play different roles than women.
It is.
Yeah, that's how you're raised. Yeah.
Yep. So we go to this, and of course, I mean, we get up and we do our first song. And no kidding you, the entire, 300 people were all slain in the Spirit, which was something new to us.
They all
Everyone's
fell
playing
on
the music, and everyone's falling over. It's like, what the hell's going on here? You know?
They're feeling it. I guess
they were feeling it, and we were scared.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
But Ruth comes to us and says, you're the most anointed, and I'm going to send you to the young man that I anointed who has a worldwide ministry, and you're going to be his worship leader.
Okay.
That person happened to be Benny Hinn.
Oh, my God.
Sent us to Nashville.
We never got audience
to meet with Benny. Benny was having a bad night at that conference. He had all the cameras shut off. He was just pissed off because the arena wasn't full and there not enough money was coming in. He had the camera shut off, and he went on a 2-hour rant telling them how popular he was, how he would never come back to the city. He would go to other cities, and you wouldn't get your healings in this city if you don't come up with the money and don't fill.
Like, that is so not Christian.
Am I exaggerating at all?
No, it wasn't very Christian. As a Christian, that's not Christian.
We literally slipped out and avoided all contact with Benny and drove back from Nashville, drove back to our home. It's like, what just happened?
That's nuts. Yeah, I bet that was a huge shocker because you're going into it feeling excited and wow, we've been referred to this person who's a real big name, and then you hear. So you were there listening to his rant.
Oh, we were there for 3 hours.
We heard the rant.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
We went back to the hotel after that.
We literally sat in the front right behind Jan and Paul Crouch of TBN.
Man, does she have big hair.
Oh, huge hair.
She looks like a doll in person.
Tiny little China doll.
Tiny little China doll with nice tight skin.
Oh, my God. I had read about Benny Hinn in, I was really into the Bible Answer Man in my later high school years. It was. I'm about 10 years younger than you because it was about 1999, 2000, kind of in that time. I was really into that stuff, and he wrote a book all about like Benny Hinn and TBN, those types of preachers. And there was a story, maybe it wasn't in that book, but anyway, this story I heard was that an old lady gave Benny Hinn like her last dollar, and she told him like, this is my last dollar, and like he went into the back and like waved it in the air and said, hey guys, I just got her last dollar. And so when I read that, I was like, this guy's evil.
For sure.
That kind of confirms.
Wow. It was another one of those big culture shocks.
What are we doing? Like, these are our Christian heroes, and this is not the values that we grew up with. This is not what we were taught to do as Christians.
Well, we moving from kind of mainline evangelicalism for you and more fundamentalism for me, and moving both of us in music, and she's in opera, and so it's secular, and and all this stuff, and then we explore the different genres of Christian music, and then we're encountering all these different
genres of Christianity.
Yeah, right. You're just taking it all in, and you're seeing all the contradictions and all the craziness, but at the same time, you're meeting a lot of very nice people, wonderful people, so on and so forth.
But I found that friendship in that world is very subjective to what you believe.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the things that coming out of it now has broken. Well, it broke our hearts over and over and over through the years, to the point that I think that's one of the things that led to us having to get out, because we just couldn't take it anymore. It hurts too much.
We were talking this past week about oftentimes, we just discovered podcast in the last 2 months.
Oh, cool.
So we discovered you, which has been wonderful, and a few other podcasts. So before that, we didn't even know. We thought we invented the word deconversion like 3 years ago.
We did. You thought he was super creative.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So what was I going to say?
I have no clue.
I have no clue either at this point. It'll come back if it's great. If it's anointed of God.
Right. If God wills it.
Yes.
That's funny.
So we eventually do make our way to Wisconsin and plant a church, and it's kind of a freaky.
It's a very non-denominational. Definitely, like because of where we come from with the music of the charismatic realm, We embraced the lively music. We didn't say no if people wanted to, have spiritual, supernatural things. Like, we didn't shut any of it down. Although there were people that were doing like prophecy things that were just really messing with people's lives that we had a big problem with, that we shut down. And it's like, we shut down God. And how dare you shut down God because we're prophesying.
Yeah, and I told one lady she couldn't wave her Israeli flag in front of the church. Mainly,
we're not in Israel.
Yeah, we're not in Israel. And the fact, too, that you're flag whipping people. It's just, whack, whack, whack. No, you can't do this, The church was small, about 9 people, adults started with it. It grew, and it's at a zenith point of over probably around 350 or so.
Wow.
Running a couple services, lots of programs, staff, all that stuff. For one reason or another, I got put on this list where I was one of the top 300 influential ministers in the nation. Now, I never have seen that list. I was told. And it's got to be credible because it was the president of the NAE who told me that. So
it's interesting that they're tracking that.
Yeah.
I find that interesting.
We had a church of 300 people in Wisconsin.
Exactly.
And
how
we're
does
telling
that,
people not to.
This is during the mega
people.
church movement. 300 is nothing in the mega church movement world,
right.
So I find myself invited to Washington, D.C., and I'm rubbing shoulders with Tony Perkins and Family Research Council, Dobson, all those different groups, Alliance Defense Fund. Going to Alliance Defense Fund's headquarters is very interesting. It's armed guards everywhere. And it's like you're waiting for something terrible to happen, or something terrible is going to happen to you. It's just
so I'm familiar with Perkins and Dobson. What's the? You said it's the Alliance Defense Fund.
Okay, there's a number of groups that they fight the good fight, the cultural fight in the world against all the gays and all the bad stuff that's going to cause America to slide off into the pits of hell forever and ever.
Yeah.
Like Jay Sekulow, who's now counsel with he worked with back and forth between Liberty Counsel and Alliance Defense Fund, and now he's working for Trump.
Wow. That's just so revealing,
Yeah. Went to D.C. for a couple years. I worked on advisory boards that were an arm of the National Association of Evangelicals, and so I met a lot of people, worked with a lot of people.
He took me there, and these people would come up and they're like, "Wow, your husband is so great." And I looked at him like, "Who was that?" And he'd say like this big person. I'm like, "How did you meet these people?"
I don't know.
How did this happen?
But looking back on it, really what I saw happening was there was a core group of 8 of us that were national advisors, and we flew all over the nation and counseled churches and helped them. My specialty was helping them be better at administration. Most churches that I encountered, they're just freaking terrible with money and everything. It's common sense stuff. First of all, spreadsheet does not belong in a Word document. Let's get it out of a Word document, put it in Excel, and then we'll start working from there.
Oh no!
Which
should give people pause. Like the people that you're giving your money to, that you're giving God's money to, like like they misuse it and they mishandle it.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
And I find myself as I'm traveling, speaking to small groups as well as massive groups. 3,000 people and all this different stuff. So, meanwhile, my little church is back here, struggling to grow and everything. They really need a pastor to be more present.
Yeah.
But I'm struggling with, and we struggle with, this must be what God wants of us, Again, we're going to get swallowed by a big fish if we say no. But I was really conflicted because I saw where mega church and mega politics intersect.
Yeah.
And it was scary. It was fucked up. It was just, just terrible. There are a lot of good people, not, I
think there's so many well-meaning people, and then there's so many big egos.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I think had we continued on that path, had things gone the way that everybody wants it to, like fame and fortune, we could have ended up there because it's easy to get swallowed by that monster.
Yeah.
thankfully it didn't in our case. And now that we are on this side of it, I'm so thankful because I'm like, boy, had this deconversion happened to us while we were on that big stage, I don't know what would have happened to us or how that would have played out in our lives. It could have been catastrophic because it was hard enough to do it privately. And to do it in front of a lot of people would have been so difficult.
What's the song we were jamming out in the car to by Imagine Dragon? Pain.
Believer.
Yeah, Believer.
Yeah.
What's the lyrics to that? Do you remember?
I do, but I don't want to quote. Believer is a great song.
Yeah, I know it.
But how's it go at the beginning?
Well, which part are you talking
about? The
about?
verse into the chorus, where it's basically he's saying what has made him in his life is all the pain.
Yeah, seeing the beauty, speaking the lessons from the brain, seeing the beauty through the pain. You make me a believer.
Yeah. So we were jamming out to that. That's like, yes, perfect deconversion song.
It is. Yeah, there's some good ones.
Because you're going through all this stuff. We didn't lose our religion, but we were definitely in the corner. That's me in the spotlight, losing my religion. REM. Mm-hmm. We were definitely in that corner. And so I come back. Things with that advisor group were good for about 5 years, and then it kind of all blew up because the president of the NAE at that time, it came out he was popping pills and having gay sex and all this stuff. And
was that Ted Hager?
Yes. Yeah, okay. Ted Hager.
Yeah, because I watched Jesus Camp before that happened, and of course I'm like, oh my God, this is I had deconverted at that point, so I'm like, I love that documentary, and then a couple months later or something, I was like, oh my God, that's the same guy.
Yeah.
Because he counseled President Bush.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, we were friends. I was part of that inner group there. And don't know exactly how I became friends.
No, it's crazy. I don't know how you did either.
Kind of a weird, freaky thing where I got a phone call inviting me to come to Colorado. And, the rest is history. Just, again, we look at strange things like that and say, oh, this must be the hand of God.
Right.
Yeah.
So we got to explore and see what's here. And I can still remember when the news broke. Oh, my goodness. I didn't believe it. It took me 2 weeks. And then I was angry. Felt like I'd been conned.
Yeah.
I'd sat in his office, been part of his council groups, all this stuff. And it just was shocking. And I wasn't mad about the gay sex and all that stuff. I was mad about the whole con thing, the lying. Why couldn't you just be honest?
And for me, I felt like there was just some exploitation of innocence.
Yeah.
For people who were looking to him for leadership and spirituality and purity, and that got exploited. For me, that's what made me sad.
We should throw a disclaimer on here. We are not anti-gay in any way, shape, or form.
Not at all.
Yeah.
I actually got in trouble here in town because I invited the whole gay community to join our church and baptized a lesbian and So, wasn't mad about that part of it.
She became a transgender, actually. She's a man now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I haven't talked to her in a while.
Yeah.
For him. Yeah. So, we come back, we focus on our church, and things grow and grow and grow. And I get an invite to go to India. I go off to India, and that's really when everything started popping.
That's when it happened.
It's
and
like all these little things.
And just for like a time frame, how long ago was that trip to India?
It's been over 10 years now, hasn't it?
Yeah, 10 years.
Okay.
The first trip, and then there was a second trip.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of like halfway, maybe not exactly, but about halfway through your time at this church.
Yep.
You're going through all of these things. I'm at, and then you go to India. But I'm so, like, something that's striking me a lot when I hear you talking is, you guys went through so many things that were like an attack on your faith that could have like caused you to leave the faith for so many reasons. Like,
man, we stayed strong.
I mean, the little things like the learning the different languages, but then you guys lost a child, which is like huge. I can't, and then you see Benny Hinn and he's a total fraud. And then you see Ted Haggard and he was a fraud in his own way. And you guys went through all of this and still somehow were able to hang on.
We were the poster childs,
We were. I just don't even know how we did it, but we did. I mean, we really had this, I'll speak for myself. I had this core, deep-seated belief that God was good, and I never questioned the foundation
Yeah.
of my faith. And
Yeah.
for me, the foundation of my faith was that God is good. Everything else that was crumbling didn't necessarily shake that foundation for me. But it did erode the foundation of the tenets of Christianity for me. So that's where I'm still very spiritual. I still do believe in a God. It's definitely not the God that the Christians talk about, but
yeah, for sure. For me, going to India, I was invited to backpack through northern India. The goal was, with this mission agency, to backpack covertly into dangerous regions where Christianity, the tribalism there is not open to Christianity, or Christianity hasn't been in at least 100 years, and try and connect with indigenous Christians if there are some there. And so,
which you did, you found some.
Yeah, I mean,
and what was the motivation for the trip?
Adventure.
Okay. Something different. So this was just a kind of like, this would be fun. I'll do this.
It was a friend, after the things collapsed with the NA and all that, I met so many and networked with so many people. And this was head of one of the biggest mission agencies in the world. And he calls me up and says, "Hey, will you backpack with me?" I'm like, "Heck yeah. Let's do it."
That sounds amazing. Yeah.
So I get on a plane, fly to India, and we're backpacking. And I remember we found some people that were Christians. And this is what broke my heart. Was they're having a secret underground church meeting, like we've heard about the underground church. Finally, we're there.
Yeah.
And they are all in skinny jeans and, pearl snap shirts and faux hawks, Mohawk faux hawks, and cheap Mexican made strats hanging off their hips. And they're singing, "Shout to the Lord, all the earth, let us sing," Hillsong. And I sat there and I'm in shock. And it hits me. We have not exported Christ. We've exported culture. And then I asked myself, how much of what I do is just purely cultural?
Wow.
And it just messed me up in that moment. And
because here you are in a place, in a country where it's completely outside of the Judeo-Christian foundation that we come from. There's none of, they don't have that in India. It's a totally different set of cultural standards and beliefs.
Yeah.
So I go back and I gather my leadership team, and the church is doing super great and everything. And I sit them down and I tell them this experience. And I ask them, so what if we took, like 3 months and evaluated every aspect of all of our different programs, all of our different services, everything we're doing, and ask ourselves, what really is cultural? Just traditions.
Yeah.
It's like my administrator, she had said in her family, they always cut the end off the Easter ham before they bake it, before they put it in the pan. And then one year, her aunt, she was asking her aunts, why do we do that? And they said, well, Grandma will know. They went to Grandma and asked Grandma, and Grandma said, well, my pan was too small, and I never could fit the ham. Here, the whole family just been cutting the end off the ham, thinking that's what you do.
That's a great analogy for like faith.
Yeah. Exactly. So began the unraveling. And we just started saying.
So we had a lot of, you already had a lot of fuel for the fire from previous parts you're doing that we've already covered. So when it started to unravel, very quickly.
One of the cultural things was the sinner's prayer and the altar call. Where do we find reference for these, And I remember one of my uncles was dying, and big family, and he was not a churchgoer or anything. And so the whole family is concerned about him dying and going to hell in this moment.
Yeah.
And so the Methodist, this almost sounds like a joke, but it's real.
But it is real.
The Methodist went in and had my uncle pray, the
Methodist tradition.
Methodist tradition prayer. These are all siblings of his going in.
Yeah.
Then the Nazarene goes in, and he prays the Nazarene prayer for salvation. Then the Baptist goes in. He prays the Baptist,
Wow.
And then I get a phone call afterwards, and they're asking me, do you think he was really saved?
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, in that moment, I looked at T and I said, they don't believe it. They don't believe their own recipe, their own formula.
That's interesting.
Because they're calling me and asking me if he's really saved.
Well, because how could he say all these different prayers?
Like, because he loved you and he's wanted you to be happy.
Right? On his deathbed, that's what he was thinking about, was
I want my family to have peace.
Peace of mind, so they don't think I'm in eternal torment somewhere.
Yeah.
That's a really fascinating story. Just the mental image of just these different family members going in, okay, you're going to pray the Nazarene prayer. Let's pray this. And then they leave and the Methodist comes in or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So he was sick, and then that was going on, and it does seem like it's kind of, you're starting to question the very like foundations of the things that you believed. You're starting to really question like the basic traditions.
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
And this is all while you're in India, or?
Yes, while I was in India.
Okay, and how long were you in India?
The first time I was there was 21 days.
Okay, so a few weeks, and you're going through all this, and she has no idea you're going through all this kind of inner stuff.
Oh, I'm texting her, late at night, because it's early morning here at that time, and I'm like, we got stuff to talk about.
And it's a blizzard here. It was February the first time we went, and I got a ticket because I couldn't. I had 3 little kids at home, and I couldn't get the car shoveled out to go anywhere. Yeah,
we got 56 inches of snow in 1 month.
It was crazy.
It was nuts.
That's just Wisconsin.
Meanwhile, I'm in India the whole time, and it's 114 there.
Just night and day, totally different.
Yeah. Wow. But T and I have always been always been the type. Even when we dated till now, we always discuss. We always talk together. We're always brainstorming. We're both the creative types, so we're always exploring. Music and art and movies and everything. So
that's cool.
It's natural for us to talk like that.
Yeah.
And so I'm texting her and saying, here's what's going on with me, and we got to talk about this.
And when he first started texting me that stuff, like, I was really intrigued. I loved it. I mean, I got the picture that this is cultural. This isn't Jesus that we're exporting. And so the unraveling of some of the sinner's prayer and everything here in the West that we tell people, you have to believe this, this, and this before you can call yourself a Christian. And then once you do those things, we still question it.
Yeah.
Until the day you die,
really saved?
because you have to do all these other things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's totally true. Like, all you need is just to say the sinner's prayer and then you're saved. And it's like, well, but you shouldn't act gay, or but you can't be saved by your works. You're only saved by faith, but you can't go to that movie. It really is.
There's
Christians,
never-ending unspoken list of things that you have to do.
That reminds me of the great anointed thing I was going to say, but forgot.
Yes.
What's that? Listening to different podcasts, what people say, what I hear a lot of people say is what they miss the most is that sense of community and friendship. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about that this last week, and it's like, we have friends, and we have friends, but it seems like so much of what we experienced in 26 years of ministry, those relationships are so freaking unhealthy.
For sure.
It's like they want to know everything about everything.
Mm-hmm.
Have you masturbated this week? What friend asked you that? What in the world? Leave me alone, all that type of stuff. How much TV are you watching? How much Bible, all this stuff. It's just like we are so nosy, and so it creates a hotbed for codependency. Well, nothing about it is healthy.
Yeah, and gossip is totally
big time.
They preach against it, but like that is so rampant in every church. I mean, the Christianity and praying for someone gives you a reason to spill their personal life stories to people.
Absolutely.
And when someone does get saved and they come in, like what you were saying earlier that made me remember, was all the judgment starts in. Mm-hmm. We start evaluating, if that salvation is really at work in their life. We start evaluating the whole sanctification thing, all this stuff, and that's a huge argument. Progressive sanctification or instant sanctification. all this stuff.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
And then can a Christian have a demon or not? And and this person's great for leadership, but they've been divorced.
Yeah.
Or they're a woman, but they're an incredible speaker. Can we really have them? And so
Wow.
we come back and realize all that stuff is just cultural. It's prejudices, it's biases, it's terrible stuff. And we begin to just reorder everything. Before we knew it, opening the doors, bring our gay friends to church. We can all come together,
So, this is after you've come back this 3 weeks in India. You're kind of bouncing ideas off her.
But it's
and I really
super quiet and on the down low.
Oh,
he
yeah.
was masterful about just really bringing it in very gradually and quietly, because I think our intention was never to harm. I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing to have a certain set of standards that you adhere to that are good and healthy for you to live by.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, to try to be a good parent to your children and to try to be a good wife to your husband, and those are some things that people come to church for.
Yeah, the transition was more about,
so we didn't want to mess that up necessarily.
Yeah, instead of being against something, let's be for something. So much of Christianity is all about against something. I don't think Christianity would exist if they gave up Satan. Because they have to have an enemy. That's the big unifier.
Well,
it's like we have to hate the Democrats. We have to hate the gay people, and we have to, the Muslims. We have to hate them.
And what if people aren't really sinful? What if sin doesn't exist?
Yeah,
what if people are just, they make good choices, they make bad choices. Some people make really bad choices. Most of us make some bad, some good, but we don't need saving. If we don't need saving, if there's no big bad, original sin, then there's nothing to be saved from. There's no savior needed.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
And for me, I was a senior pastor, the founding pastor. I had a lot of great equity with the people. They loved me. I was good with administration, so they trusted me. So
you're a charismatic speaker and leader too, and he genuinely cared about the people, and they knew
absolutely.
That. So that's why he had equity with
them. So they were willing to follow me. It's not like I had to, just pound it into them or fight with them or argue. Yeah. We're now going to let the gay community come to our church. None of that.
However, it did cause problems with your associate pastor at that time, and there was a little bit of problems with us. During that time as well, because you were starting to get a little bit too gracie for my personal taste at that point. And I didn't really like that so much. Not that I am against grace. I just didn't, I think for me, part of it was there are natural consequences when you do make poor choices. And so by him taking away some of the preaching against
the condemnation.
Him taking away the condemnation for me was like license for people to make bad choices, which I didn't want people to have to suffer the heartache of bad choices. So that's really where it was for me. So I think that's where the tension started.
And
with us.
My comeback to that was, listen, I am spending a large part of my week counseling people, meeting one-on-one with people. Everyone who comes to me already know that they screwed up. That's why they're sitting there talking to me.
Yeah.
I don't have to tell them they did something wrong. They're telling me they did something wrong and now asking me, how do I fix all this shit?
And so your angle was just be easy on yourself, stop beating yourself up, that kind of thing?
Exactly. And my motto was, do the best you can do, be nice, and use breath mints. It's just really simple. If you do your best, well, you are going to make mistakes, but at least you did your best, so you're not going to live with a ton of regrets. And if you were nice while you messed up, at least you were nice, and good hygiene is important. So use breath mints.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
It's like manners.
And it became like a motto in the church. We should have put it on the front of the building,
We should have monetized it. We'd be rich.
It was like the most anointed thing I'd ever said in 26 years of ministry.
And you stole it from someone else.
That. Oh, yeah. I stole it from a friend. He calls me up and says, I hear you stole my saying. It's like, well, you know how it goes. The first time you say something, you say you name the person's name, always says. The second time you say it in public, you say, someone I once knew said. And the third time you say it, I always say this,
Yeah. How much time went by from the time you got back from India to when all this started to happen? Was it immediate?
We started talking among our leadership council.
It was pretty
and
immediate.
started really brainstorming, and it clicked for all of us quick. And at the time,
Okay.
I was doing a series on the kingdom of God, or the kingdom of heaven here on earth. And I did a surprise roundtable discussion with the leadership council on a Sunday morning. I let them know I was going to do a raw conversation live, but I wouldn't tell them the topic, so it could just be like we're talking right now,
Yeah.
unscripted.
Unscripted.
You know?
Yep.
Yeah. So we all get up on the platform, and I throw the topic out there about the kingdom of God, and we start talking it through. It went over awesome. People loved it, standing ovations, and everything. And the next day in the church office, we're all standing there drinking coffee and congratulating ourselves, that really went well. That went so well, And then it hit me. I looked at the council member and said, oh my God, we just repudiated original sin. And we're like, what are you talking about? I said, well, you said this, and you said this, I said this, and you said, and all of us were just like, oh shit, we just blew original sin out of the water. So we ran into sanctuary, we load up the CD, we listened to it, and we're like, heck yeah, we totally agree with that.
We do not believe in
There was
original
no
sin.
argument among us at all.
Funny.
All of us.
And then, but then, T, you were having, at that same time, you were not on the same page totally? Or is this a different time?
I didn't have a problem with originals like that. Like,
Okay.
She's like, I'm tired of you calling me a sinner.
Yeah,
So.
Exactly. Stop calling me a sinner because I wear shorts. But no, for me, I think it was I struggled with the extremity of grace, and I think when you start to, if you want to hang on to Christianity, and you get rid of some of the condemnation, grace becomes so extreme to compensate for how bad God was. So I just didn't know how all of that fit for me. Not that I wasn't down for the journey, but it definitely, we did have some heated arguments. I remember him, like just questioning him, and he got so mad at me. He started quoting scripture against me and going point by point.
And the Greek says.
And I'd be like, whoa, I'm just asking a question. He's like, oh wait, I'm sorry, you didn't deserve that. He was arguing with his associate pastor, as if I was him.
Yeah.
Like cross-examining you like in a courtroom
like,
or something.
Wait. I don't have, no. So, I mean, it was a very tumultuous time for sure.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
It finally got to the point the entire leadership council was with us 110%.
Except for the associate pastor.
Except for the associate pastor.
Yeah.
So we had a meeting I went off to India for the second time. And I was there a whole month. I got typhoid. I come back.
Almost
died. It was terrible. I had, PICC line hanging out my arm into my heart and hospital.
He was too weak to get up on Sunday mornings and preach. So the associate pastor had to resume some of the duties. He had rethought
some things, and he was pulling them back into the hands of an angry God,
Wow.
And the council did not like that at all, And so I finally am able to get back. I'm not able to stand, but I can sit on a stool and I can preach, from the platform. Everyone's happy to have me back. And of course, I am just loading them up with love and grace and basically Joel Osteen's "Live Your Best Life Now," type thing. And,
well, we just started to realize that a lot of the destructive things that people do in life aren't because there's too much goodness. It's because of all the pain that they carry, or the bad things, or the painful things, or the hurtful things.
Or they
that
didn't
were done
know they
to them.
had a different choice.
Exactly. So what we wanted to do is kind of counteract that thought. Condemnation doesn't fix anything.
No.
It doesn't help people to live it. Maybe it does superficially for a little bit, but it doesn't really fix the problem.
But condemnation, it controls us and keeps us there at every service and volunteering and giving our money. That's what condemnation does.
Yeah.
It's a tool of manipulation. Yeah, guilt trip everyone.
But it doesn't actually get anybody like to the place where you feel internally free, where you feel internally whole.
No.
Where you can say that you're acting out of pure motives. There's always that duality when you have that condemnation as a motive.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to be good, but you're condemned into being good. So it's just this kind of messed up.
Yeah. Yeah, hard to trust yourself and your own motives when you're constantly feeling guilty and then questioning yourself and all that.
Yeah.
Because there is no
pure.
righteousness within you. It's all as filthy rags. You can't even love your spouse, if it isn't God loving your spouse through you. It's all this just weird, strange stuff. There's no good in you whatsoever.
So you're having this not a battle or anything, but it's kind of this battle between you and this other pastor in a sense.
Pastor.
I know it wasn't like a battle.
There was never an open battle, but it did come to a point where the leadership council, we all met at a diner early in the morning for breakfast, and the whole thing kind of ended with the associate pastor pounding the table in the middle of the diner and yelling at me, "You can't tell them God loves them."
Whoa.
That's when the chairman of the council turned and said, "You know what? I don't think we're going to be able to reconcile here. We wanted to, but I don't think we can."
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Because this guy ended up taking over the church, right?
No, he
left. Yeah.
Yeah, with just a couple people, and
but there was because been sick, and because he was such a big figure in the church, that big of a leaving had a compound effect.
Over time
it had a compound effect, and because we no longer really believed in a lot of the things that the church members there expected us to believe or wanted to hear us say and believe, it just wore on our strength to be able to continue, because it's like having to hide yourself but do something.
By this time we had given up original sin, inerrancy of the word. We had given up second coming, rapture, silliness. We'd given up rapture like 20 years ago, though. But we had given up substitutional, atonement. That was just ridiculous. It's just a pure argument for eternal human sacrifice. So stupid. And so all of that had fallen away. I found that I really didn't know what to preach anymore or how to preach, even though I was good at preaching. What text do I pick?
Yeah.
I see the contradictions. I see the ridiculousness of it all.
And so this was the council that was kind of on this page with you, right? Like they were
110%.
But the congregation itself, how were they feeling about these things, or how much were you talking to the congregation?
He wasn't open with them, because I think we could, when he did try to give little pieces, I think you blogged for a little bit and would try to introduce some of these thoughts through a blog, because he could do that not as the pastor. It was just him blogging. And because the church members would read his blogs,
it really wasn't.
You could feel the atmosphere changing at church. You could feel them getting angry and very uncomfortable with some of the things he was saying.
So much the church members as it was outside of our church in the community. When I was writing my blog, it really took off, and I had quite a few thousand people following me, and so I was edgy. I wrote an article called "Formerly Homophobic," and told my story, and that really pissed off the pastors here in town. So the people at our church didn't have a problem with what I was saying. What they had a problem with was they were getting questioned by their other Christian friends in town that went to the other churches. Like, what the hell's wrong with your pastor?
They're not conforming
Did you know
anymore.
he wrote this? Did you, So
that's crazy.
So that was the uncomfortable nature of it. And at the time, you have the super rise in Trump and politics and everything. And of course, the hating of Muslims, and you're trying to, talk with people. Don't hate the Muslims, it's just all this stuff. We have gay people coming to our church, and people in the community are spreading rumors that, the gay people are making out in the front rows while, pastors speaking.
So not true.
Ridiculous, crazy stuff.
They were super respectful.
So all that was happening, and I really just continued to focus on, basically I preached the 12 steps is what I did. I just wanted to keep people moving forward in life and realizing that you know what, you do have choices and things can go better for you, and so on and so forth. And really had a great loyal following that loved this. But I would say with the last election, it was very clear that these old prejudices and preferences and biases, they're just not going to die, And I'm at this point almost 20 years into it. I just don't want to convince anybody of anything anymore. I need a break, you know?
And I don't even believe any of this stuff anymore.
No, don't believe any of it anymore. And I don't want to be rah-rah Trump, and I don't want to be this, and I don't want to be that. And so we as a leadership council sit down and talked, and, you know, this was our baby, for lack of a better word. We had built this together, and we cared about these people.
Yeah.
And we realized that beliefs, you know, is as important as they are to people. It's all just a smokescreen. People believe one thing this week, believe something totally different the next week, and the next week, and the next week, you know. So there's no need to press any of that stuff. Why don't we just do our best to put together an exit plan, work behind the scenes to assimilate new leadership in, get them trained up in administration and all the different things, give them all the best things that they need
so they can
to work
have
with.
the church that they want, to do what they want to do.
And then we can graciously bow out. And so that's what we did for 3 years. Just brought in new leadership, brought them up, gave them all the resources they needed. We worked ourselves out of jobs. That was traumatic. You know, what the hell am I going to do with my life now?
Yeah.
Because you can't put that on a resume.
No.
You can't put pastoring on a resume.
But as a church planner, the little different thing about a church planner is they often do work on the side for quite a few years, you know, and that was me. I was a construction consultant and a lot of, you know, commercial and residential. And so I did land a very, very good job at a huge $1 billion company, and I work with national accounts, and it's been great. And I'm salaried there. And then my boss is from France, just a segue here, and they needed someone to work with the Quebec account. I was like, well, my wife speaks French. He's like, bring her in, she's hired. So she had never done anything with construction or nothing.
Oh, wow.
I was a stay-at-home mom for a bunch of years, and for a brief time, I owned my own business.
That's
those
really
skills helped me a lot.
Yeah, that's really great, because that's hard. That's a hard transition. I mean, just find another job, you know, like.
Absolutely. We had seen enough of our friends who had either their church had fallen apart or for whatever reasons they
self-imploded. They had self-sabotaged affairs, different things, or self-imploded.
And we saw what happened to them, that they were personally in a very hard situation, that they were very financially desperate. And so we had a heart-to-heart.
No, you put down an ultimatum to me.
Okay, so
okay, it's a little different.
From my heart, I put down an ultimatum.
She's like, we can be done with this Christian stuff, but we are not going to be poor. That's what she said.
But for me, like I was like, I can lay it down. And I also saw, like, in the Christian community, the wagging fingers that you get. See, I told you so.
Yeah, you become a proverb.
You become a proverb, and I did not want to be a proverb for other people, because we didn't believe that anymore. I wanted to go out, and I wanted to make sure that LANT, we are taken care of, that our families are taken care of, that we can move forward and live the life that we want to live, and we can leave this chapter behind us and come what may for the people who still want that. But I was not going to be that proverb for them. So we worked very diligently to make sure that we had jobs, that we secured those, and we had enough time and equity in them before we made the announcement and stepped away, that we were going to be okay.
And I had a lot of equity with the people. They knew I cared about them.
Yeah.
So they were fine with me working this full-time job and still pastoring this church. They were perfectly fine with it.
Yeah.
And of course the leadership council was too, because they were all transitioning out with me.
That's the most remarkable story. When you wrote me and kind of told your story a little bit, I could not believe that, like, an entire church group, a group of leaders at a church, like, all together would kind of take the journey together. And you mentioned you would have, like, deconversion parties at your house.
Yes. Oh, yes. See, we invented that word. I'm sorry. You have to thank us.
somehow we connected.
The collective consciousness. So, we'd have all these conversations, and eventually the conversations would make their way over to our house. We have a beautiful patio, and people started joining those, and it grew. It was very holistic. There was no set time for it. It just happened. And we would talk about everything. We talk about movies, social criticism, art, literature, books, music, and Bible, and just everything. It was just a crazy, just the conversation would go everywhere.
But
all the time.
I think that's why they moved along with you, is because it was so open.
And we just, nothing was off the table. Everything could be out there. We could talk about anything. If we found ourselves disagreeing with one another, it was no big deal. We'd all have an old fashioned, brandy old fashioned,
which is a big deal in Wisconsin.
Tell jokes and cheer it for next week, and maybe next week we'd find that it was just all bullshit to begin with. And it doesn't matter if we believe it or not.
But you've created this environment of it's okay to explore our ideas and just as friends and as human beings, just talk and discuss interesting topics. And that's a really positive learning environment.
Yeah.
And so
that's what we did. And it all grew out of that then. And so people started calling it patio church. And there were Sundays even. It didn't happen on Sundays, it was patio church, but there was some Sundays we'd actually come home from church. We'd get home, well
There'd
after
be
everyone else.
On our patio.
There'd be people sitting on our patio waiting for us.
Oh my God, that is so funny.
With drinks in hand, ready for patio church, and had things to talk about,
Actually sounds like a lot of fun, just sitting around with friends and talking about interesting things. And for I don't know, I'm sensing this, but for me, what was really something that I look back kind of with some nostalgia is when I was learning about the Bible maybe not being, inerrant, that there could be errors in the Bible. And as I started to discover some of these new ideas, it was actually really exciting. It was really
definitely
invigorating. Oh my gosh, I'm on this really exciting journey. Where could this go? I mean, at the same time, I'm kind of blocking out the consequences, which are going to be pretty devastating. But I sense that group of people, it was kind of an exciting journey, kind of an exciting time.
It really was. I mean, we were passing books back and forth, like the Underground Railroad type thing, all this liberation happening between us. We were getting free of our bonds, and it was exciting. But the whole time we were thinking that we were actually coming into a more progressive, or as Brian McLaren would say, a more generous orthodoxy. It never dawned on us that we'd arrive at a point where we were okay with an atheist.
Yeah.
We were okay as an agnostic, as a human, and a humanist. It never dawned on us. Again, we hadn't even read any of those books. We hadn't tuned into any of those podcasts. We didn't know anything existed like that, So when I was sitting on a park bench after the whole thing finally out, and I got to tell you, being free on Sunday is amazing. Sunday brunch,
I bet,
that's
because
a beautiful thing.
You were a pastor for so long. You guys lived that life for so long. You don't. Yeah, I bet. I mean, it was free for us. We had little kids at the time, so it was kind of thank goodness we don't got to go anywhere Sunday. We're exhausted from
But and the whole time, the last 2 years of it, I was working full time.
So we worked
as
literally
a project
7
manager,
days a week.
7 days a week, church, everything, still senior pastor, doing it all. And,
so when's the tipping point where you left? I know you kind of decided you weren't a Christian before LA did, but
my moment where I decided I wasn't a Christian, I had started a business, and I had not done anything other than ministry, which was with LA our whole lives. So that's all I'd ever known. And so me starting a business was a great journey of self-discovery. I learned in the business world, you can't necessarily talk about churchy things, but I was always and still am interested in helping people. And so because people knew of my pastor, my husband being a pastor, they would want to talk about those things. And sometimes they would bring their friends who weren't spiritual and want to talk and want me to talk to them. So I found non-churchy ways to convey things that I thought would be helpful to them. And I think through learning that other language, if you will, of saying things differently, made me realize I don't think I even believe any of this stuff anymore. I'm definitely down with helping people, but I don't believe it's really necessary to have to ascribe to the death, burial, and resurrection,
We
or
also
to have to ascribe to original sin.
We also
Any of those things.
Came close to people who were not Christians at
and
all.
they were wonderful
and they
people.
were very nice people.
They were so
like they
much
had a moral
nicer.
Compass.
Yeah, some of them were nicer.
Somehow
than
without a
Christian
God.
friends.
Weird.
How could
Oh my
they?
goodness.
Yeah.
How could they?
I remember like one of the skincare products that I used, and I watched it on TV. Ulla Henriksen. He's I think Dutch, and he's got a famous skincare line. And he's a gay man, and so delightfully wonderful in his interviews. And I watched him, and I'm like, oh wow, he's gay. Oh no, I shouldn't like him. But he was so infectiously like happy and kind and generous by nature. I'm like, I like him better than I like some of my Christian friends, and I don't even know him, but you could just feel his energy and just like feel the essence of who he was. I'm like, I like that. If that's going to hell, then I don't know how I feel about this whole thing.
And as you
so
can
it all
see,
started to unravel.
Yeah.
Everything that caused the unraveling was everything from our favorite HBO series, True Blood, to Ulla Henriksen skincare products,
to Greek,
to trips to India. I mean, it's just a hodgepodge of all kinds of experiences that eventually a tipping point, and we realized, okay, I finally realized where I turned to T and I said, I don't have to be a pastor. And I was free of it. The thing that had been put on me when I was 17.
When you said that, though, the ugly cry ensued.
Oh, my goodness. I wept. It was just like everything poured out of me. And
I remember when you came out of that, he said to me, I just realized all of the other people's expectations I've been trying to live up to my whole life. And those expectations that I put on you and our children for the sake of the ministry and the call. And he said, I am so sorry. I didn't even know. He's like, but I don't have to be that anymore. And we don't have to be that anymore.
Yeah.
And it was a very freeing thing for us. And I think for us, there was a lot of healing in that moment, because in the years, even when we were finding jobs and making our exit plan, because of the financial stress and burden of things not always going well, and people being constantly at odds with us and against us, and the community of people talking about us, it took its toll on our relationship. And there were a lot of moments in there that we looked at each other, and he said, I don't want to be married to you anymore. I'm like, I don't want to be married to you anymore either. So,
but I don't want to start over.
But at the same time, to be divorced would mean that, okay, we have to somehow finish this church thing. It would mean we would lose all sources of income.
Yeah.
It would mean that our family would be split up. It would mean probably that I would go home and live with my parents again, like just to walk through the scenario of what our life would be. And there was no help for us because we'd let all these people. So it was just such a hard position to be in. I am amazed that we made it through it.
Yeah.
But we did make it through it. It was very difficult. And I think just not wanting to have the destruction that would be on the other side of it is the only thing that held us together. Was just, I didn't want to live that destroyed life.
It wasn't my good looks.
It wasn't your good looks. It wasn't my good looks either. Sometimes it's not enough, Sometimes it's sometimes knowing how much worse it could be. You're like, okay, I have enough to, it's horrible right here, but it would be a whole lot worse if we would call this quits.
And we also kept wrestling with all this stuff, and we'd have those light bulb moments.
Yeah.
And it just, we finally hit that place where we knew that we were free of it, and now we could transition out.
Yeah. So when you said I don't have to be a pastor anymore, did you still consider yourself Christian at that point?
Yeah. Yeah, okay. I did.
Yeah.
I did. I just, again, didn't see this coming.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I was...
Who does?
Yeah. Walking, downtown Milwaukee and Hipsterville and drinking my hipster coffee, and then it hits me hard. And I call up the administrator, from Foreign Church, and I called to confess my sin.
To a woman.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Uh-oh.
Hey,
whoa.
I am not a Christian. And she just broke out laughing. Said, "Congratulations, good for you."
That's so funny. So this is the administrator at the church.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Part
she
of the
was,
leadership team.
yeah, kind of along for the ride.
Uh-huh.
Were you the first one to say that on that leadership team?
I think I was.
I think you were. Yeah, T was. Yeah.
So I know you told him. Did you tell the leadership group first, like at a meeting or something? Or
I
was
don't
it just
think
kind
I
of?
actually
I don't think
said
you did.
those words
Yeah.
to them.
It just
I
kind
don't
of
think
came
I did.
out.
Yeah.
I think I realized it, and again, like we've discussed a little bit in this discussion, like what you believe is so irrelevant to
It is.
our human connection. So I didn't really think it was a terribly relevant thing to share.
Yeah,
quite
yeah.
honestly.
Well, and it shouldn't be. I mean, for us, it's a big deal when we deconvert because Christianity in our world is huge. So when you leave that, it's a big deal. But if we didn't live in such a, I guess, uptight evangelical circle or culture, then
I think
it wouldn't be. People wouldn't care.
No.
I think for me too, like I did all the music at our church and I was still in front of the people and I didn't want to hurt LA in any way. Like I didn't want that to affect him because now his wife and the worship leader isn't a Christian anymore. And I don't feel like I had to hide it necessarily from the leadership team, but I mean, you know the kind of damage that can cause.
Oh,
so
for sure.
I just continue to serve.
A good friend of ours who tells us that they're gay, but no one else knows. You don't out them,
Right.
right? You're still friends. You honor that friendship, and that's the way we looked at the congregation. We're going to honor this friendship, and really, it's not important what they believe or we believe.
Yeah.
No, it's all immaterial. So if this is their tradition, they hold on to it. Good for them.
Well, and you guys have good hearts, like just because you thought about the people in the congregation and how this would impact them, and so it's actually kind of insane to me that you created like a 3-year plan on like how to like progressively like separate from the church and make sure they're okay, make sure you guys are all okay. I mean, it's hilarious in a way.
Yeah.
We
sound brilliant on this side, but we didn't feel that way.
It was a hard transition to make, and I think again, a part of it, because I hold the checkbook at our house. Like I knew how bad it could get, no, we have to make sure that we are taking care of.
And at the time, T, you weren't working. Were you still a stay-at-home mom at that time?
I had my business at that time.
Okay, you did, but still, it's somewhat new to you at that point. The business. Yeah. So you knew, like, if the business didn't go so well at some point and he wasn't a pastor anymore, like, that could really hit you guys hard.
Yeah. Our first plan was a little tea shop downtown on the historic Main Street. It was great. I mean, brick and mortar is beautiful. It went so well, but we just couldn't make enough money selling tea.
Yeah.
We were good at it, though, man.
It seems like people like to drink coffee in America.
Yeah, maybe in England, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we're brilliant.
That's so funny.
Maybe not so smart.
So we did that thinking, okay, here's our plan. But that we knew right away into it. Okay, when the lease is up, we're going to get out of that.
Yeah.
And that's when I landed the job that I landed. And honestly, it was my friendships at the church that I served, where I'm looking for a job. I'm so depressed. I'm not praying at this point because who am I praying to?
Yeah.
And so I decided I'm going to talk to my dead grandfather because he made a career change in his life, the same age I was at that time, and it really worked out for him.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and I didn't know it until I was talking to my mom, and she tells me, that, your granddad saw that farming was going to end, and so he became the state fire marshal for Illinois, and had an amazing career.
That's
so
cool.
I'm sitting there smoking his tobacco pipe, talking to him.
It's like a spiritual connection, yeah.
Yeah,
in a way.
Smoking his pipe and talking to him, and of course he doesn't talk to me either. But I do get addicted to his favorite tobacco at that point.
That's
So
how he
he's
speaks to you. Yeah.
addicted to nicotine now
Yeah.
and still looking for a job.
He took a
Yeah.
job change at the same age, and he got addicted to nicotine, and now you
Yeah,
are.
exactly.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
Like reincarnation. Maybe that's something.
I am the grandfather. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm talking to some friends at church on a Sunday, and I was like, I have these different job offers, but I don't want to take them. And they're like, well, so and so, you did their best friend's wedding, and like,
I did.
I did. And like, yeah, well, she's a headhunter for this big company here, and you should give her a call. And so I called her. She's like, oh, I will do anything for you.
Oh my God. Well,
And
that's
within
cool.
a week, within a week, I had an interview and then a job. And then a year later, T has a job. And then a year later, our daughter, our oldest child, has a job there. So we all work together. But all that was born out of friendships.
Genuine.
That
And we did a good job at our jobs, and we still do. I mean, we still work there.
Well,
we do a good job
the
at our
friendships
jobs.
that led to the job were, why would you burn bridges if you don't have to? Not saying that you need to play both sides.
Yeah.
When you're with this group, you're a Christian. When you're with this group, you're an atheist. No. Just be authentic. That's what Patio Church was always about. It's just be authentic. And I was actually last night, one of the guys from our previous church, I've been his pastor for quite a few years. He and I love to go see movies together. So actually the three of us went and saw Deadpool 2.
Oh.
It was great. And we come back and T's tired. She goes to bed. So I set up with my friend who's a doctor, and we visit back and forth and laugh and talk. And we're talking about different things like we did with Patio Church. If we all if everyone on the planet tried to live the American lifestyle, it'd take 5 Earths. We started talking about diets and food and stuff that we've been reading. And he looks at me and he says, so what's going to save this earth? And I was like, you know what? I tend to gravitate towards the humanist viewpoint. And he looked at me and he said, that's really cool. I like that. But
cool.
That conclusion to that conversation went that way because I wasn't a shock jock.
He didn't take a hard line. I don't think
know?
he still understands like that we don't identify as Christian, but
No, but it's just one
it's
step
a friendship.
at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and ultimately it's not going to matter because you've established that relationship. You're a genuine person. It's a genuine friendship. So,
exactly.
If you truly are friends, and I mean, you guys know this really well, the people that are truly your friends, they stick with you.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter what you believe.
Yeah,
Right.
Ultimately.
No.
Yeah.
And I know from pastoring for 26 years, oh my Lord, people don't believe hardly anything. This is a tradition. This is, well-meaning people, good people, but ask them what they believe, and basically what they will say back to you is what Sean Hannity said the night before, on Fox News.
Wow.
That's basically what they're going to recant back to you.
You're saying that they kind of like step in line with the tradition and like try to...
You step in line with the tradition and expectation, certain prejudices, certain politics, and those things actually drive their beliefs. It's not really the Bible.
My wife was saying this morning, we were watching a documentary, and she was saying that a lot of Christians, like evangelical Christians, they're not even Christian. It's just their team. It's like, we're team Christian, and like whatever the evangelical Christians say or do on TV or whatever, they're just going to follow it. That's their team. And so they're against the other.
Exactly.
They don't care about some of these doctrines. Like most people who go to church don't even read the Bible.
Yeah, exactly. They can't tell you chapter, verse, or anything. Yeah. And then they never do work through the fact that the God of the Old Testament is just, euthanizing whole cultures of people and craziness, just insane.
Right.
And it just, they never, I listened to an interview with Greg Boyd. He's a progressive.
He's great.
Yeah.
Well, I really liked some of his writings.
Yeah, I have too. His open deism and everything, that was really helpful. But I guess he's written a 10,000 page volume. There are 2 volumes now, where he started out writing to try and disprove the God of the Old Testament. We ended up proving that Jesus and the God of the Old Testament are the same and are good. And what happens is that whenever anything bad happens, like, killing off all the Amalekites and this and that and all this stuff, is that actually God withdraws himself and it's Satan who does all that. And the people of the Old Testament just misinterpreted it. They thought it was God.
Oh my goodness.
They thought God told them to go and cut all the foreskins off of the Philistines, you know.
Ew.
It's just, I mean, if you got that command from God today, what would you do? You want me to cut what off?
That would make
From
the news.
who? You know?
Or like sacrifice your own son.
Yeah, it's just insane. But I like Greg a lot. But
yeah, that's a lot of excusing away and really stretching it.
10 years of his life and 10,000 pages. I just have come to this point where I don't give a flip about those theological gymnastics anymore.
Right. You can just let go of it.
Yeah, just free of it. Just free of it. I don't have to make it work. I don't have to make excuses for this God and all this stuff. I don't even have to worry about any of that shit. None of it. I could just be a human being.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful, wonderful thing.
That's very freeing.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a few some final questions as we wrap up here. So when you think back, I know for you it was so recent, but when you think about maybe the more kind of traditional Christian version of yourself, what do you think about that person now?
There were definitely tough times and so on, but I guess it was just my journey. I'm not ashamed. I'm not embarrassed. And maybe I'm embarrassed a little bit about going to Bob Jones University for a semester, but that wasn't my choice.
Yeah, you're kind of forced into it.
I remember preaching about this quite a bit. Here's the preacher coming. I've been out of the pulpit for 6 months, so bear with me.
Yeah, preach it. Let's do this.
The greatest commandment is love God with everything you got. The second commandment is like the first, love others as you love yourself. What I always found in evangelicalism is we always emphasize love God with everything you got and love your neighbor. We never emphasize love yourself. And I did a whole series. That's kind of my goodbye was a whole series on how to love yourself. And so I guess when I look back at myself, I really appreciate myself for who I was. I know that I was sincere, not perfect, but no one is. And I realized that I was trying to fulfill so many other people's dreams, trying to live up to so many other people's standards that they themselves could not do.
Yeah.
It was all ridiculous. All of it was crazy. So I guess I'm grateful to be almost 48 now, married 26 years, have 4 great kids, adult kids who are so good, who walked with us in this whole journey.
Wow.
And
yeah, we didn't even get into that.
Yeah. It's I guess I love myself.
Yeah, that's a really
awesome.
good answer.
And then for me, I think that looking back on myself through the journey, I think I mirror some of that, just appreciating the effort that I made, the good that I tried to do, even though I didn't understand everything. And I feel like a lot of times, like we as humans, like we're just trying to do the best with what we know and understand at the time.
Yeah.
And I see that that's what I was trying to do. And a lot like him, trying to live up to his expectations, because he was the senior pastor at the church that I served at, and my husband and other people's expectations. But finally just freeing myself of that. And I'm so happy that I did. And I have so much life left to live. And I guess I am so excited to live the rest of that life. And I'm hopeful that because of the journey that I've had, that perhaps I might be able to be of some encouragement to others who are struggling, because I know how desperately alone I felt during that time.
Absolutely.
And so hopefully...
And we had one another, and we had friends.
We did, but I didn't like you sometimes, and you didn't like me sometimes.
Exactly.
So, just to have some... And I feel like as a woman too, I think women in particular in ministry have a unique struggle. So my hope is, having gone through that and making it to the other side, is that there might be some who might not have to feel so alone because they connect or resonate with something I say, because we were utterly alone. We didn't have any of these voices.
Wow.
Yeah, a crazy question would be to get in a time capsule and go back and ask young LA and T, what do you think of your future self?
I would have been horrified.
Yeah, like what went wrong?
Yeah, who reads Chris Hitchison and Sam Harris and agrees with everything they say. What do you think of that person?
Yeah, that's
That would have
insane.
been scary.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I think my mind would have been blown if I had thought that thought.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that wouldn't even be conceivable,
No.
In the short time that you haven't been Christian, is there something that each of you learned or experienced that you think you wouldn't have if you'd stayed Christian?
That's a good one. I don't know. I guess because we had a good 3 years of transitioning our lives, we've built so many friendships outside of the church, went on vacations with friends outside of the church, and I don't know.
You see, what would the Christian T not have done?
Probably
Go see Deadpool?
Ninja. Yeah, Deadpool, yeah.
I would not have seen Deadpool, and that was fantastic. I would not be studying ninjutsu, that's for dang sure. And I absolutely love it. It's awesome. It's very empowering.
That's cool.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it was, I think for us, because as we've discovered, it was such a slow, gradual transition out that we started to free ourselves of some of those religious constraints little by little. I think because of that one's kind of a hard question to answer.
That's okay. One question I really like asking is, each of you, when you began this journey as very conservative Christians, are very different from the people you are today. But there's always something we can look back through our entire life and see something positive about ourselves that carries through. What's that thing for you guys?
A big buzzword for me through all the years, and if you would go back to the church that I came out, I just left, they would probably say authenticity. That's what LA's all about. He doesn't care if you're perfect. He doesn't care if you're this or that. He just wants authenticity. And so I would think for me,
being real.
Yeah, just being real.
Yeah.
Be nice. Do your best. Use breath mints. Be authentic.
Yeah. And I think for me, the theme that I can see throughout my whole life is I've always been an encourager of other people. Always wanted to lift others up and help others and inspire other people. That's always. And I still am that person post-Christianity.
You don't get into, being a career minister to get rich.
Right. Unless you're Benny Hinn.
You get into it because, exactly. You get into it because you do care about people and you do want to help them.
For sure.
Now, the whole reasoning behind that is not even there anymore for us, but still the core idea of just being an encourager, being authentic.
Yeah. I'm coming to really like that word, authenticity. It's come up in a couple podcasts. In fact, the last podcast it came up in, it just seems like just such a great thing. And it comes up with people. And I just think I don't know. Yeah. It's a good value, good moral to have in life.
It is. I mean, it's like who we are right now. Will we be the same person 5 years from now? I hope not. I hope we keep evolving,
I hope we keep growing.
So it's not important to be any this or that. I think it's just more important to be authentically who you are in this moment, in the present.
Well, if, as you know, there's someone listening to the podcast right now who has just deconverted. What encouragement or piece of guidance would each of you give that person, having gone through this so recently?
I would say, congratulations, be patient with yourself, and resist the urge to be an ass, very kindly, don't be a shock jock. Find a safe place where you can wrestle with what's going on.
That's cool. How about you, T? What would you say?
Absolutely. I would say definitely to resist the urge to be an ass, to, not burn bridges, because you never know where other people are. And it's not important to change other people's minds.
Yeah.
It's more important that you find out who you are
and what you believe
and start to live from that authentic place, which is way more important than trying to get other people to believe, because that's a very Christian thing, is to try to get other people to believe what you believe. So resist the urge to try to de-Christianize people like you tried to Christianize people. Just let it be.
Because as a humanist and agnostic and atheist, if we truly believe that belief, that doesn't matter, then why are we trying to proselytize people? Right? But that's a hard thing to let go, because if we grew up in the church, I mean, that was put on us at a young age, that every friendship, there's an agenda there. You've got to lead them. You got to proselytize. You got to convert them. And I think for some of us coming out of all that, that's the last thing to go, is that proselytizing paradigm.
I think that atheists can be very evangelical sometimes.
Exactly.
Very preachy and...
Yeah. That's where, in listening to your podcast, I loved your approach. It didn't have any of that shock jock, any of that, you're wrong and I'm right type stuff.
Yeah.
It was just very awesome stories being told.
Yeah.
And we talked about it like, do we dare talk openly like this? And we came to that point where it's like, these are brave people. Their stories mattered a lot to us. Let's give back too.
That's so cool.
And so it's just something as simple as that. And it's wonderful to have a venue like this. And for someone like you who's willing to put the time into it, because doing a podcast can be a real pain in the ass.
It takes more time up than you'd think. Like, it actually, and I'm kind of a perfectionist, so when I'm editing them, even if it's a small little thing, I have to fight it sometimes. Like, I'm getting better at just being like, it's okay. They don't care if someone heard me clear my throat, or people aren't going to care if they hear a little bump or something, but I can't help it. Sometimes like, no, I got to take it out.
Yeah, I know right where you're coming from.
Yeah. So... Well, is there a resource you guys would give someone who's deconverting? It can be anything.
I listened a couple weeks ago to The Naked Pastor.
Yeah, he's really good.
Podcast you did. I really like his website.
Oh, cool.
It's a great website.
Awesome.
I checked it out after I heard him on your podcast.
Oh, sweet.
So, and I know I haven't joined in with his groups or anything, but I know he has a group that you can join and so on. And he seems like one of those that, again, he's not a shock jock. He's just a really good critical thinker and very supportive.
Yeah, and he used to be a pastor, as you know. So
exactly.
Yeah, he has that mentality.
Yeah. Yep.
What about UT? Do you have any resources you could think of that you would, recommend for someone who's deconverting?
I do not.
Ninjutsu?
Hey, it works. I've had people recommend the Book of Mormon play, which was awesome when we saw it. I've had people recommend all sorts of things. So yeah, ninjutsu might be a good one.
It would be good for you. It's honestly ninjutsu. It's about helping others at its core. I like that.
Yeah.
It's very grounded. Which is so different than Christianity. Christianity is very ethereal. It's all about what you believe. It's all up here. But ninjutsu is very much grounded in movement and feeling and how you touch and how you receive people coming at you.
And what's different?
It's real. I love it.
What's different about ninjutsu and Christianity is in ninjutsu you actually get to use a real sword.
It's awesome.
Not the sword of the spirit.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything that we haven't discussed about your story that you want to share?
Is there something that you wanted to go over?
No, if I keep talking, we'll just keep talking and talking and talking. There's so much.
I know. Yeah.
I mean, even from childhood, still so many things. I think there's a lot of stuff that we deliberately leave out just because we don't want to hurt people. We don't want to hurt family. We don't want to.
Yep.
I think telling it the way we've told it is good. Yeah, it's good.
Well, it was a pleasure to meet both of you and to hear kind of both sides of what it was like when you were deconverting, and it's so, and then just such a remarkable story with the leadership all kind of following the same journey together. It was, and
they're all doing great themselves. They all have good jobs. Everyone's doing great. We were all working on our patios this past weekend, planting flowers,
That's so cool.
Snapchatting one another.
It's just so nice not to have that pressure of the churchy expectations or other people's expectations, and just being able to be an authentic human being and garden and get a tan
And every so many weeks we'll meet on Sunday for brunch. Yeah. And catch up with one another. And yeah,
that's great.
Everyone's doing really, really well.
It's a beautiful experience, and that is good enough.
Yeah.
Exactly. Very well put. Well, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. They can email me at lemrich, LEMRICH @mac.com.
Well, LA&T, thank you so much for joining me today. It was so much fun to just hear your story, and you're very nice people, and it was really nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Nice
Thank you so much for being part.
I bet.
This has been great. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Voices of Deconversion. Be sure to join us next time by subscribing to the podcast. If you'd like to learn more, check out our newsletter at bodpodcast.com.